I mean, I was really criticized when I was younger about my footwork. And then later on, I feel like those became kind of styles of movements, right? Like using your momentum. And that was just me from being like a little kid, not knowing how to use their feet. And I'd be like swinging my body and didn't have the power to lock it off statically. That was a lot of it, actually. Like I had strong fingers, but I didn't have strong static power. And so I would always just like jump to things and stick it.
Welcome to the Testpiece podcast. This podcast is about all things high-level climbing, how to go from good to great. I'm your host, Joshua Horsley. I've been climbing for over 30 years. We recently updated our Patreon, and now you get exclusive content from the guests that you love. You get your episodes before everyone else, and they're ad-free. Try it out now at patreon.com/testpiece with a free 7-day trial. Okay, let's start the show.
Chris Sharma, welcome to the pod, dude. How's it going?
Thanks, man. It's going good. It's going good. Yeah, happy to chat again. I mean, I know we met up last year in Mallorca, but it's nice to see you again and have the opportunity to share on here on the podcast.
Always good to talk to you on, a podcast and over Zoom. Definitely wish we were in Mallorca instead. Just gonna put that out there.
Well, you can pretty much insert that into any situation, and it.
Oh, what a special place.
No, but it was cool, man. I was thinking about it today. I was driving somewhere and the landscape of professional climbing has changed so much over the years. And for me, it's been sometimes a challenge. I mean, I think social media is really empowering. We've seen all these cool things about it, and, it kind of puts the power in the hands of everyone. But it's also a challenge because it puts the responsibility upon the climber or the athlete to promote themselves, and that's something that I've never been comfortable with. And it's always been a lot easier when I've been able to work with a videographer or a magazine article where they call me up, we do an interview. It's just easier to have someone else deal with that than myself taking the time. Always feels awkward. And I was thinking about it today in the car that I feel like this kind of new form of like podcasting is a little bit going back to that, or it's an opportunity to have someone else help us athletes tell our story without having to do it ourselves, like on social media. And so I'm grateful for that, kind of see things come full circle in a new form. But to have that, have someone to help us pull the info out of ourselves rather than having to be like, hey, look at me, look at how cool this is. Like, it's such an awkward position to be in.
Well, it's interesting you say that, Chris, because I do hear from the younger generation, they struggle on having to put out some brand that is, this is me, and have to craft that whole image and then also be an elite climber. But like when I think about your super long career, Chris, like you have been good at being in the limelight. And yes, you're working with people like Josh Lowell and just, unbelievable amounts of great videos of you out there. But I always thought of you as being a professional who showed up for the video shots, did all the media. Like, you really put out a professional face, and you didn't seem to shy away from like, hey, I'm just going to go into the desert and climb hard rocks and never tell anyone. Like, you were a face of climbing. You are a face of climbing.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I appreciate it, man. I think it's just a lot easier when you're doing that with someone. So in that case, with Josh Lowell and Big Up Productions and Brett and, his brother, Brett Lowell, but then many other people I've collaborated with, it just having someone there capturing, and it's like you're collaborating versus like nowadays, it's really all on the athlete to, not only perform, but also document and produce. And I was out climbing yesterday, actually, and I was pretty impressed. There was these Chinese climbers there, and they put up a drone and then went and climbed. And I was like, whoa, makes a lot of sense, but it requires a bit of forethought to have to do that every time you go climb. And I really appreciate having those people that have been in my life that have helped me tell my story has allowed me just to be more authentic, I think. And so that's been a really great collaboration over the years for sure.
Yeah, what a great synergy you and the Lowell brothers had, and a lot of people along the years. I mean, when Josh came on this pod, he saw something special in you, and I'm glad that you entrusted him with some of the direction and vision. And those movies, that media, I mean, I'll just speak for myself, changed my life, where I went and sought out those climbs. Like, I was just thinking about randomly, like Los Humildes Picasa, which is in King Lines. And just when I saw that, dude, I was like, I gotta go there and get on that one. And, and actually it makes me wonder about when you started doing more camera work, there's a big shift in just climbing with your buddies, hoping that you send, having a blast. Maybe it's cold, so you go out and show up. But then there's the pressure of having like a camera crew, and they paid a lot of money to be there, and they're hanging right next to you. Like, when did that shift in your career from just being someone who went out and climbed, had fun, to like, oh, I got to perform right now because, I don't know, we're here for me to do X, Y, or Z,
Yeah, I mean, for me, was from a super young age. I mean, before I met Josh or Mike Call, I had my like debut in the Masters of Stone 4, which was like the old school,
Love that. Yeah.
classic films, which I feel like, looking back on it, I mean, those were pretty amazing films as well, to be honest, and were super impactful for me and my generation as well. But definitely, working with Josh, working with Mike Call, working with, a number of other people, I feel like there is an element of pressure sometimes, but the fact is those guys are like really close friends of mine. And even though Josh is almost 10 years older than I am, we still kind of grew up together in this whole thing. We met in Waco. It was his second production. He had made this little bouldering film at the Gunks, and then he went down to Waco. And so all of this kind of uncharted territory, we kind of went through together in a lot of ways. And it was always very collaborative. And there was moments when I did kind of shy away from it, or try within my own personal relationship with climbing, trying to like make sense of what all of that limelight and stuff, what that role plays in my, relationship with climbing. But ultimately, seeing this opportunity with Big Up Productions, Real Rock, all those guys, just documenting my climbs, just amazing to see the impact that we had on others. How many people got excited and able to inspire so many people. I don't know, I think it's interesting too. One of the things, and these days now it's almost, if you don't film it, it's like, does it even count, right? Like, which is interesting because everyone has a smartphone, and I think it's an interesting thing to contemplate a little bit. I think specifically in my case with some of these, important routes that have been kind of groundbreaking in climbing, documenting them is an important part of that process, right? It's like, it really is similar in my mind. If you have an amazing musician who creates this masterpiece, song or something, and no one ever gets to listen to it, right? It's like there's a piece missing in the arc of how we're all connected, and I think there's a beauty for sure about being in a completely isolated, disconnected from society and doing this very pure activity of rock climbing that I love very much. But I think, especially when something defines you in such a, big way, it's like important for somehow that this thing that we do fits into the society in some way. And it really is, like, as a professional climber, I think it's our way of contributing in some way. It's our little, grain of sand that we're like adding to the, human race or whatever. It's a little bit cheesy to say that, but I think that's what we do. And so documenting that and sharing that with other people allows it to, inspire others, and it takes on kind of a life of its own. And it can, like, well, in my career, for example, like these climbs have, inspired, thousands of people, right, over many years. And so And that was something actually when I went to film Biography. I had been there when I was 16, and then I had taken some space from it for a couple of years or a year. And I was really in this moment of like kind of this reflective place in my life, and I had dealt with this knee injury, and I really wanted to come back to climbing in this kind of pure, authentic way that wasn't wrapped up into, being number one or being this or that. I just wanted to connect with climbing this very pure way. And so I really did consider going back to that route without anybody, without any camera crew, because I wanted that experience to be untainted by any of that stuff. But my father actually told me, he's like, no, you should go there with the camera crew. And in that way, your climbing can be for others as well. And you can convert that into a useful tool to inspire other people, or bring some bit of happiness to other people, right? And that was really like a shift in my view of those things. It less of it being this narcissistic thing of like, I'm here with my camera crew and making this production. It's like, no, this is a tool that I can embrace to, somehow channel something good out into the world.
This is why having a good crew to do this stuff with is so important, because I think why it resonated, why good media resonates, is because it actually is authentic. Like, you're not narcissistic, makes it sound like you're almost putting on a show, or it's like, look at me, versus encapsulate this and pass along this story. And that's why I think often makes, the show was called Testpiece. And when I thought about, people ask me like, what's a test piece? And I think climbs can be singular and beautiful, but oftentimes the ones that we seek out and remember, there's a story behind that, both in like the first ascensionist, but also for yourself. Like, it's, there's something tied up in there with like story and the timeline versus just the piece of rock, which again, nothing wrong going out and climbing on your own and having that pure experience. But I'm glad you chose to loop us all in, man, because like I said, it does inspire. It did change my life.
That's cool, man. No, yeah, I think it's interesting. I think it's something, going back to that point that we were just talking about, this challenge for, rock climbers, which maybe even more so in the past would tend to be somewhat awkward people that like to be out in nature, but it's an awkward place to be, to, also have to promote yourself. And so, yeah, I think it's a hard balance to strike. It's not something that I didn't struggle with, but I think it's something that it's not for everybody either. And I think there's a lot of amazing examples of extremely talented climbers that have chosen not to do that. And I have nothing but like huge respect for them. And I think, everyone has to find their own path and be true to that, and find a way to, be authentic and do what's right for you. And for me, I just felt like I was kind of thrust into this position from a young age. I was kind of like the first climbing star, right? Coming from the climbing gyms. I started when I was national when I was like 14. And so, I was put into this situation, and I just want to do justice to the opportunities and things that have been, given to me, the position that I'm in, and just, kind of do it right, just try to do the right thing, man. Just trying to do the right thing, like through my whole life. I wasn't really seeking that stuff out. It just kind of, it all came. And I think that's a really incredible situation, set of opportunities that I've been presented with, and just want to kind of do justice to that. But yeah, I think it's a completely different situation if you're like, oh, I want to become famous or something, and that's a totally other kind of can of worms in a way. I mean, everyone has their own path though, and I think I'm just trying to navigate my own, and do the best I can. So I'm not here to judge anybody.
I think it's funny how one of the hardest things to do is to just be yourself. And often as we get older, I think you get better at it, so it must have been tricky being thrust into the limelight. And yeah, I was thinking about this. I was like, of course, 39-year-old Josh is psyched to talk to you, Chris, because of some of your latest FAs that are just modern and futuristic. But then 9-year-old Josh would have wanted to talk to you and asked, you won adult nationals just now. I think you had just done surf safari. And so I love like thinking about young Chris. And I don't know, when you started in Santa Cruz and you kind of ended up at like one of the first climbing gyms in the country. I'd love to remember that side of you, and just curious if like you instantly took to it. What was climbing like for you right in the beginning?
Yeah, well, so like I grew up in Santa Cruz, California, and my dad was a surfer. My mom she was an Indian dancer, classical Indian dancer. So no real connection to rock climbing. They were both like being in nature. My mom would take me hiking. One of her friends, and I think he had done some climbing, and he recommended. He's like, you should take him to the climbing gym. There's one up in Berkeley, and my mom is originally from Berkeley, and we'd go up there to see my grandparents. So I think on one of those trips, she took me to the climbing gym, and it was just like this light bulb moment where I kind of clicked with something more than I'd ever done up to that point. Up to that point, I'd tried, of course, surfing and all of the other team sports like soccer and baseball and skateboarding, but nothing. I'd never really found my thing, right? And whatever. I was only 12 years old, and it's not that weird, right? It's just, but definitely when I went and tried climbing for the first time, it was like this kind of epiphany. Like this is like, wow. It was like love at first sight, and found something that I was so turned on to. And yeah, then like they had told us that a gym was going to open later on that year in Santa Cruz, and so I went there while they were building it, and I actually asked them for a job when I was like 12 years old, and they didn't give me a job, but I had like a paper route, and I was delivering newspapers, and I like saved my money, and I bought all my gear, and I became a member at the gym, and yeah, it was pretty life changing for sure. Like going from this kind of, I don't know, just kind of typical 12-year-old kind of up to no good, like on the weekends riding your bikes around, getting into mischief and stuff, and Santa Cruz, to suddenly every second of my free time was spent at the climbing gym. And it was also like a really pivotal moment in my life because I had just went from this small private school up in the Santa Cruz Mountains called Mount Madonna School, which is a very small private school founded by a yogi, Baba Haridas. And it's like kind of the tradition my parents were following. And I went from there to a public school that was like very kind of like rough. And it was just a challenging time for me coming into that whole mix into middle school and just finding my place. It just wasn't going very well. And at the same moment, I found climbing, and it just like, I just went all in with climbing. And it's interesting, I think almost not fitting in too well in school was kind of a blessing in that sense. It just really like funneled all of my energy into this amazing place, this amazing activity where I met all of these incredible people. Most of them were older than me, and they're still some of my best friends today, like Andy Puvel and Sterling Keane, and then a couple of other friends of mine, Justin Vitkov and Adam Long, that were same age as me. And yeah, just I think probably quite similar to many people that when they start climbing and you look back and it's very cool to still be friends with those guys over 30 years later.
That's amazing. Yeah.
And maybe nowadays it's shifting a little bit, but I think in general, like climbing provokes like a pretty strong reaction in people, and it ends up becoming an important part of their life and their identity and their community and everything. And so yeah, that was definitely the case for me as well. Yeah, so that was like all of that challenge, kind of difficult times at school made it very easy to just like go all in with climbing. Like I said, I was climbing like 7 days a week. That's all I did. I would ride my skateboard after school to the climbing gym, and I would go on the weekends. I'd be there like 12 hours a day. And yeah, never had like a coach or anything like that. It was just going climbing with other people. And that's really, even to this day, really kind of defined my style, I guess. I mean, a lot of people have coaches these days, and definitely seems to work. So, but I think definitely what I appreciated about climbing, and it's still one of the things I love about it, is that it's like I mean, there's obviously like some rough boundaries and, rules of the game, but it's just like you go and do your thing. And it's just very different from team sports in that sense. And I just love the free form. And I was just like going and doing my thing and exploring this thing. And then, yeah, just kind of scratching the surface of understanding like this amazing world and culture and all these incredible characters that were pushing the limits, and how it was this global thing, right? Seeing these images of like whatever Ben Moon and Jerry Moffat and Wolfgang Gulick and all of these guys, and of course everything that was going on in the U.S. as well. But just like it was really inspiring to just kind of start understanding that whole world, and yeah, it all happened quite fast because, like I was just saying, like within 2 years I was the national champion, right? And then a year after that I did Necessary Evil, right? So it was within 3 years, which 3 years these days doesn't feel like anything to me, right? But it's incredible to see, to reflect on that. There's of course a lot of kids climbing really hard these days, but I think even still that rate of progression is still kind of unheard of a little bit. So
yeah, Chris, I remember I started climbing right around then, and actually I came out of gymnastics into climbing in early 90s. And actually one of the things I loved about climbing was what you said, where I loved gymnastics, but it was so regimented. And then when I started climbing, it was just like, there was no coaches. Cause I don't know, people like didn't seem to coach back then. They're like, go up. Like, do you want a heel hook over your head? Do whatever you do, But I remember, I was brand new back then. I'm a little younger than you. So I was only, 8 or 9. And I remember you hitting the scene and just going up, dude. Yeah. I remember Necessary Evil, and you just kind of were marching along forward, repeating hard stuff, doing first ascents. And what really stunned me about you, though, when I think back, Chris, was that there is a lot of kids who come up, especially nowadays, who repeat things. And there's nothing wrong with that. They'll go and try to cut their teeth on Necessary Evil because you did Necessary Evil. But I think you really are inspiring because there's this shift in your career where you blazed your own trail. It's very different to repeat a route, and it's really special to find something, do the first ascent. And then when I think about Biography, we did jump doing a new grade too is something that's a little different. I just would love to visit that shift in your career.
Yeah, I mean, I think there was definitely, I went through the hardest climbs around, the Bay Area, and then, I went to like Mount Charleston, kind of seeking out sport climbing. It's so funny now living in Europe and just seeing reflecting on how close I lived to Yosemite, and didn't really appreciate it, right? Because it was just something when you don't really appreciate what you have in your backyard, I guess. But really, I think at that moment too, in climbing, like sport climbing was just taking hold, and it was really the hot thing. But so I went through and did Surf Safari, and then I did Closing Down, and then I had that the trip where I went with Tommy Caldwell we went and climbed Super Tweak, and then we went to Wild Iris, and then we went to Rifle, and that was like really defining moment for sure in my climbing, because like Super Tweak specifically, that was the first 14B, I feel like, from an American, and like Boone Speed was someone I like really looked up to and still do, still a good friend of mine. But yeah, like dispatched those like very quickly, like in 2 days or something. I did that in like 5 tries or something. And so suddenly, like, yeah, it became clear that there wasn't much left to repeat. But I think, yeah, like the people around me, I think certainly Tommy Caldwell had a big influence on me on that trip. I got a chance to travel with him. We went to Rifle, and I think maybe we went to one of his home areas, but he was definitely, had been climbing longer than me. He was a few years older than me, and learned some interesting things from him. He was already with his dad putting up some routes, and I think also my friend Sterling, going back to just like where we grew up bouldering, around Castle Rock, and some of the local stuff around Pinnacles as well. We put up this climb called Ubermensch, this 514, when I was just 14 years old too. But maybe more so, Sterling really influenced me in that, seeing new lines, right? And it was I think that's a real like important shift. It's one thing going and repeating these things. It's more of a athletic pursuit, a sport. You're like doing this sport thing. You're going to, try to do these set challenges. Whereas doing new routes is much more introspective, creative, kind of combination of those things. It's also mixing high level, athleticism or whatever, but it's more philosophical in that sense. You're more just like, you're trying to appreciate nature in a new way and see something that didn't exist before, right? By like reading a line. And I think that really resonated with me as well, as we were speaking about just the traditional sports and the competitive nature of it. And when you're going out and doing a new route, it's a completely clean slate. There's nothing, it's your own journey. You're not comparing it to anybody else's achievement. And I think there's a lot of just kind of freedom with that. I think at the same time, looking back on it, I did have such a fast ascension, in climbing, that I was kind of a bit of a young punk at that age, when I was like, I mean, shoot, I had done all the hardest routes, and I whatever gotten second in the world championships by the time I was 15, and I was just like, kind of was the shit and kind of believed it, and so saw this potential to do harder and harder things. And that was interesting. I was actually in touch just recently with Tony Aniro because, I snagged the first ascent of Hasta La Vista when I was like, I had just turned 16 or something. And it was kind of a rude thing to do. And I didn't realize it then how much that may have impacted him. But, I think it's interesting looking back on those days. I think in some ways, every new generation that's going to like kind of take a big step forward, it's kind of a natural progression to kind of ruffle some feathers too. And so, it's a kind of a natural reaction on both sides, I guess. But I felt so bad when I heard that. I called him up. I was like, "Oh man, I'm so sorry. I feel terrible about that." Ultimately looking back on Hasta La Vista is not like a super important route in my career. And anyways, I definitely learned from that.
Well, don't be too rough on 16-year-old Chris. Let's not all judge each other by our 16-year-old self because boy.
Yeah. No, but it's interesting though, like that period of being on top of the world, being this like, like prodigy, best in the world, like it was all like happened super fast. Like by the time I was 16, I was almost like, the best climber in the world, right? And then it all kind of came tumbling down. I had this knee surgery and I couldn't climb. And when I came back after that, I was much more reflective. I was appreciating climbing from a different place. And I think we can all probably look at our lives and break them up into different chapters in some way. And even our relationship within climbing is different periods. I was talking about this yesterday with a friend because we were talking about this young climber in Spain that's super strong, but he's only 15 years old. And it's really natural and almost necessary that you have to reinvent your approach and your relationship with this activity over the years. Like otherwise, it's very repetitive and almost stagnant, and I think it's important to like that moment where I had to take a step back was super important to kind of reassess and re-engage in a new way. And I've done that from, several different times throughout my career. And that's just interesting to reflect on.
So you came back from that knee injury and you did Biographie. And I was thinking about that because you're talking about how it's just this quick march upward. You're just doing great, on top of the world.
Well, so actually, right after my knee injury and I recovered, we went and filmed Rampage.
Oh, okay.
And so if you remember that film, we didn't put any grades in the film, and I feel like that was kind of connected to me coming back to climbing, but wanting to do it in a different way that was less this like athletic pursuit and more like this connection, this kind of like a more kind of spiritual thing. And I think that was had a pretty strong influence in things because yeah, it was just kind of, no one had ever done that. Like, and that's still to this day something that we all get overly obsessed about, the grades, right? And it's very liberating when we're able to kind of separate that stuff sometimes.
Well, so you just were sending everything, regardless of grade, just having fun doing it. And after you had done kind of all of those climbs that were available, and maybe you hurt your knee in this time too, it seemed like Biography kind of was the first time you got shut down a little bit. And just like, what was it like transitioning from someone who just was young, crushed everything, to like, oh, I am confronting the reality that I can't climb every climb that's out there, especially when it's a new one. And yeah, what was that like mindset shift like, or how did you deal with that, you know?
Yeah, so I tried Biography the first time I went to France on a climbing trip. And I was, like I said, I was pretty cocky. Like, it was the very first route I ever got on at Seus. I went up there, like I'd heard about this route. I was like, I'm gonna go send that thing. Not in like a main way or anything. I was just pretty driven, I guess. And there was a midway anchor, and I climbed that super quick. And then I spent about almost 2 months projecting the upper part. And yeah, that was the first time that I fell off like 10 or 15 times at the last move. And that first time I had really kind of encountered failure in climbing. And yeah, it was pretty humbling, I guess, and at the same time, I don't know, I just kind of like moved on. Like, me and Tommy were in Europe, and we were traveling around. We were doing the World Cups. We were exploring some of the other areas like Buttes and these other areas. And so it wasn't like the end of the world or anything. It was just kind of like that route wasn't really on the radar. It didn't really dawn on me how important that climb was at the time. It was just that, I was excited to try to do it. It didn't work out, and kind of, well, move on. And then I think it must have been like, I didn't go back until like 2 seasons later. So I was 19. After that first season, that I dealt with my knee, and then I had gotten that fixed. And then I didn't go back until I was maybe 19 years old. And so during that time, after we filmed Rampage, I moved to Bishop, and I was just excited to explore just the purity of going bouldering in this very just like pure way, putting up boulder problems, roaming around. And then I remember talking with Christian Griffith at a trade show. And, Christian had long had a strong connection with the kind of climbing heritage in France. And France was like the place where all of the best climbers in the world came from, especially in the 90s.
For sure.
They were like on this whole other level. And so there was a lot of like reverence towards French climbing. And I think climbing in France is extremely developed, sophisticated as a sport. It's one of the top sports as far as like extracurricular activities, for kids, is like climbing in France. I would say it's been ahead of the curve in a lot of ways. But anyways, Christian was like, you should consider going back and trying to do that route. That would be something that you look back on and be happy that you did. And I didn't really have that perspective. I was just whatever, 17, 18, didn't really see how important that was at the time. But I think that definitely planted the seed to go back, because up until that point, I don't think I was even really considering going back to do it, just because, I got shut down and it stopped being fun, going up that mountain every day. And so when I went back and I got shut down again, that was also like frustrating. But it was also where I started to really kind of like delve into these like interesting experiences of how climbing a rock can start to teach you all these things about yourself. And, if you can stick with it and push through that process, like it's this amazing journey, this amazing personal journey. And that's where the name, so I was very much in this whole time, like very deep into Eastern philosophy and meditation. And, I was spending almost more time in that than with climbing. And so I was just really was drawn to that whole process, the mental side of it, the mental challenge, because obviously I knew that I had the physical ability to do it, but then I would get to that last move and I'd always mess up. and what's causing me to mess up or fall over and over again. It's not my body, it's my mind, right? And it's this whole attachment to the goal, and all of these things. And so just a lot of parallels with just kind of like self introspection and trying to like, yeah, I think that route was very powerful for me, as far as like, one of the things I talk about when I show videos and photos of that route, whenever I do like a slideshow or something, is that through that experience, I learned how climbing could teach me about all these other things that weren't just about rock climbing. It's like when you set your intention to do something and to follow through with that, that's a whole thing in life, right? The patience that's required, to, having to go day in, day out into something, and it can be a slog, but ultimately like learning to detach from that and just let go of the ego a little bit and just find that joyous state of movement, right? At the end of it all, which is when it always ends up clicking, right? On all of the routes, which is why we ended up naming it Realization. Obviously, now that name hasn't really stuck. The French were not very happy about that, by the way. It may have been a bit of a jab, but it was also, there was a midway anchor at that point, and it felt like I didn't want to like discredit that route by Arnaud Petit, but I also really love that idea. This idea of, in France, they, when you send a route, it's like they say, the woman from the Gite was saying to us like, oh, let us know when you realize the route. And I was like, whoa, that's, we say like send it or something, but she's like, to realize it. It was like, wow, it's this.
That's cool.
I was just like, well, that's a really cool way to say it. And that like through that process, it is like a form of like self-realization in a way. And it really was kind of all of those different experiences were mixed together in that way. And I think definitely that second chapter in my career as a climber was trying to strike this balance between climbing as being this profession or being this important figure in the sport, but also like trying to keep it real and see climbing as this like very personal journey.
Dude, it's so awesome to hear how when you were confronted with failure, how it caused you to show up again and again. And when I think about you, and I think about you trying super hard, Chris, I think about you sieging things and doing them, but that's wasn't how you necessarily started when you were young. It's like, oh, I just crush everything. But I feel like it's, if you see some young phenom now and they're crushing everything, I say it sometimes on the podcast, it's like, they have a lot of potential. We'll see, because there's more to it than just being physically capable, like you were saying on Realization or Biography. And by the way, dude, I love when you were talking about it. You literally like made the crux handhold like that kind of like bowling ball. Yeah. 20 years later, still can feel it. And yeah, I wanted to ask you about the whole style that you exhibit. You said something about when you first started out in the gym, and you kind of, that gave you your style, because you were just talking about France, and it made me think that when I started climbing, spandex, 3 points on, French style, very beautiful technique was the norm. There was also kind of like the nearby Yosemite hardmen that were rough, bloodied with tape all over. And your style was different and really resonated with me. It was dynamic. It was powerful. You were looked a little different than the really thin French, drop piece that came before. That's just is that just you, or like how'd that come about?
Yeah, I think, it started, I guess, by maybe bad technique in a way. I was really criticized when I was younger about my footwork. And then later on, I feel like people started to like actually, those became kind of styles of movements, right? Like using your momentum. And that was just me from being like a little kid, not knowing how to use their feet. And I'd be like swinging my body to like, and didn't have the power either to lock it off statically. That was a lot of it, actually. Like I never had super strong static. Like I had strong fingers, but I didn't have strong static power. And so I would always just like jump to things and stick it. And so that, yeah, definitely, I think helped usher in like new types of movement and climbing for sure.
Yeah, I always think about that climb in Sayus, 3 degrees of separation. And I don't know, that was a different kind of climb than would have been done 10 years before. You're not going to lock off that dyno. And I always thought that was a cool example of you being you.
Yeah, well, I think in the same way that I was mentioning, this need to kind of reinvent our relationship with whatever we're doing, like whether it's climbing or whatever it is. I think the interesting thing in the evolution of climbing, or, I think it's similar comparisons, a lot of parallels with music or something, because these are different things that kind of bounce around the world and have these different influences, like there's a lot of European influence on American climbing and vice versa, right? And I think about, well, like one of my friends and people I looked up to, Gilles Trudeau, that put up the first 514 in America. There's this cross-cultural influence that has helped our sport develop over the years. And there's all of these different elements to it. Obviously, descending from mountain climbing, right? Like that's ultimately where it's come from. And then it's kind of taken all these different shapes and forms depending on where you do it. And, if you look at what they're doing, like in the UK, for example, with like all the gritstone, for example, versus, I remember being in Australia climbing at the Grampians and seeing how the British and German influence had impacted the route development style. But for me, it was, trying to bring together sport climbing and bouldering. That was really like, that's something that I'd always done, and maybe one of the first climbers to really kind of excel in both styles of climbing. And that's always felt like where the big potential for evolution, at least in sport climbing, was to bring more of these elements of bouldering into sport climbing. And which is why deepwater soloing made so much sense, because that really is the culmination of that vision, is like it's deepwater soloing. Essentially, it's sport climbing and bouldering mixed together, and then the Mediterranean below it, and there you have it. That's why I ended up where I am, is because it's still basically the coolest form of climbing that I've ever tried.
I will just echo that. +1, literally the best ever. I'm surprised it hasn't gotten more popular. But before we go to the Med and hang out there, because it's the best, man. I totally agree. That's where I last saw you. I want to keep on this journey of after biography or realization, and you've gone to the next level. Like it's not just easy anymore. And then after that, man, your career was just wild. I mean, you did like every single hard 515, they're like world class, they're things everyone knows about. And I'm curious, is there another chapter you can point to? Just like we kind of were like, okay, that was a chapter, you closed it. What was another big inflection point or seminal moment for you after realization?
Well, yeah, after climbing biography or realization, whatever you want to call it, like it kind of felt like that was like the cherry on the top. I mean, I've been climbing about 9 years, and I was 20 at the time, and I'd won all the competitions and done the hardest route in the world or whatever, and some of the hardest boulders too. And it felt like that might have been like a good time to do something else in my life. And I did. I was, as I mentioned, I was very much in deep with meditation, Eastern philosophy, Buddhism. And right after I climbed biography, I went on this 2-month pilgrimage in Japan, and I walked I walked like 900 miles around this island, and went and visited these temples. And yeah, I mean, it was like completely different thing from anything climbing related. And I was definitely on a different path at that point. And I think, then we went and filmed the pilgrimage. You could probably tell in that film that was kind of where I was at. That was the place I was kind of coming from. And I think right after we had premiered that film, Josh and Brett had just come back from filming with Clem Loscott and Tim Emmett in Mallorca. I saw that and I was just like, holy shit, like that's insane. Like I'd been to Thailand, but I'd never even put two together that you could climb over the water. And as I was saying, like I was still climbing, but I was not really sure where to take my climbing. I didn't feel like this beckoning towards big walls or the mountains or anything like that. And I just wasn't really clear where that next step was. And at any rate, when we went to Mallorca, after that we did a second trip back. I went back with them, and then that just like totally blew my mind. And I was 22 at the time, and that just like kind of definitely planted the seed for kind of the future to come, which wasn't really clear at that point. But I was just like, on that trip, I had definitely reconnected with this just pure, joyful, very free experience in climbing that I hadn't felt in a while, because it had gotten kind of serious, right? It had gotten to be this kind of like real deal thing, like suddenly I was this kind of important person in climbing and doing important things, right? And it just felt like going there just like opened up my eyes to, just that joyful, playful side of climbing. Just like when I just started climbing, the very first time I went up a wall, and you're just like, you don't know what a route is, you don't know what a grade is, you're just climbing, right? And of course, the quality of the rock, and then just I don't know, the exposure. It's like I said, it's like bringing bouldering and sport climbing all together. And so from there, like, I was bouldering quite a bit. We went to Arkansas, put up a bunch of boulders there. I climbed the Witness to Fitness, right?
Awesome.
And then at some point, I guess I had done a couple of other trips to Mallorca to make some articles. Like we did something for a men's journal or something. And then at one point I did like a proper trip there with some friends of mine when I was about 24. And we were just having so much fun, kind of partying, just learning how to speak Spanish too. And it was just becoming friends with my friend Miguel Riera, who's the kind of the godfather of Cinco Block, who passed away some years ago. But at the end of that trip, we found Es Pontas, and I had seen it. We were at like some tourist shop, and I saw a postcard, and I was like, "Whoa, what is that?" And I asked Miguel like where it was, and then we went out there and checked it out. And this was like the last couple of days of the trip, and I remember sitting on that arch and just like thinking about like, what am I doing in my life? And then everyone was going home, and I was like, man, I think I'm just gonna stay here and keep trying. Like this like makes the most sense just to stay here and see what this is all about. Because that route, like I think I'd thought about it a little bit, like what if I could find a route like Biography, but over the water? Like that would be like what would really inspire me in that same way. Because honestly, it felt like even just going bouldering, even though I was going to new places, it just felt kind of like more of the same thing. I was just kind of repeating the same process. And I felt like, yeah, you have to like reinvent your experience. And it doesn't always have to be as dramatic in that way. But for me, seeing that potential and then actually like finding it in a piece of rock, yeah, it was very cool and life-changing.
I like how I started out by asking you for your next chapter away from the Mediterranean. You're like, no, let's just go back. That was the next chapter.
It was, yeah. Like, it really was. Like, I mean, that, like, I tried that, and then, like, I was still not really sure where my next step in climbing was. I was doing some boulders. I think when I climbed Witness to Fitness, I was probably the strongest I've ever been. And it was an amazing experience going out there and developing those boulders with those guys. Really, like, all time. But again, it wasn't like, didn't feel like it was anything new other than we were doing these like big badass boulders. But it felt, for me, coming from Santa Cruz, growing up in the Pacific Ocean, always had this really strong connection with the ocean as well, and got into climbing away from that. And then finding this style that really merged the two things really resonated like nothing else.
You said when you first went in deepwater soloed that you just kind of reconnected with that kind of pure joy of climbing. And I remember the first time I went deepwater soloing because I saw the video that Clem and Tim Emmett did. I was like, oh, I have to go there. That's the coolest thing ever. And I really remember that sense of just, you kind of go up, you don't care where the line goes? You start getting scared. You're just like, I'm just going to climb, and you don't worry about, oh, am I en route? And I love that. And I'm curious, I know that you head towards joy in your climbing. I remember Josh Lowell, when he came on the pod and talked about why you inspired him so much, it was because you just had this joy about climbing rather than like a crack the whip on yourself and be miserable. And I'm wondering, what's the relationship between that joy you felt deep bar soloing and then the really hard lines? Not that you can't have joy when climbing hard, but there's something interesting.
Yeah.
There.
And I think there's two sides to climbing for me in that sense. And I think it's important to dip your toe into both of them, because climbing for me and for you and for a lot of people, that it's a very defining activity for us, and in that way, doing it well is important. Realizing your maximum potential is important to, if this is going to be our path for self-expression, self-realization, then you want to do that. You really want to realize what that potential is. And obviously, in that format of climbing hard performances, red points or whatever you want to call it, like that's a really great expression of that, right? And really, when you care something, you want to just dive in and pour all of your energy into the point where it's like transcends being fun into something that's even like deeper than that. But it's also like very serious, and it's not fun in the traditional sense of the term, right? It's like you're trying to do something that feels meaningful and important to you. And it's really important to also have, after each big project that I've had, I've always needed to just go out and have fun afterwards, and I've always thought that, oh man, I'm in incredible shape right now. I should just like take advantage of that and like knock off all of my other projects, but it's never worked like that. And I think it's really important to balance that out with just the playful, free flowing, kind of spontaneous, more poetic side of climbing, just like being in nature and enjoying things. And because at the end of the day, like, we shouldn't take ourselves too seriously either, right? And if it's just all about like being serious and being focused and trying your project, then like that's kind of weird too. It's important to have a balance of having fun and also really digging deep on something when we're talking about like an activity that is so defining for us. I mean, climbing it's not just this thing that I do on the side. It's as a hobby. It's like my life in many ways. And so it's important to have those intense moments, but it's also important to remember just the fun and the exploration and discovery. And along those lines, to be honest, discovering and finding new routes is probably the most fun part of climbing. Once you discover something, then you have to do the hard work of actually sending it, right? And that's where it gets a little bit tricky.
Quick break while I tell you about today's sponsor. You. That's right, you. Thank you to all the patrons who help make this show possible. Join them so you can get episodes early before anyone else, and those episodes are ad-free. As a patron, you also get to submit questions for upcoming guests. The answers to those questions are only available to patrons. Follow the link in the show notes to join now. You also get access to a private Discord where you'll find me and other people who want to go from good to great. Okay, back to the pod.
Let's close that open loop on Es Pontas, which was clearly one of the most defining climbs. I love that you said it was the biography over the sea, like that you thought about it like that. But did you have any other big, I know it didn't just happen right away. It was a battle, but any other big learnings from that chapter and that process other than just establishing something that is so iconic, man?
Well, I think like that initial experience when I found it, then I started going out there. Like I said, all of my friends went back home and I stayed on in Mallorca. I was staying with Miguel Riera. And Miguel, like the really interesting thing about him, he started deep water soloing like in the late 70s. And people in Spain didn't understand him and what he was doing. And he would go off and he would spend most of the time would be climbing alone out at sea by himself. And for me, like, yeah, I was like 24 and didn't have much responsibility, or, obviously didn't have any kids at that point. And so for me, that just was so inspiring. I don't know which film it is. It might have been Riding Giants, but they're interviewing the guy, Jeff Clark. He had surfed Mavericks for 20 years by
Yes,
himself.
dude. Yeah.
And just like what type of person does that? It's just like this incredible. How epic is that? Like as far as me, like as far as like an ideal, or that just blew my mind when I saw Miguel doing that. It was very much a similar thing. And the fact that you could do that in the same way that maybe I was out at the buttermilks having those moments as well, just going out and establishing boulders with my crash pad and being by myself or with a buddy or something. But being able to do that on a larger scale, with the elements of the ocean and everything like that. And so for the first few months that I had worked on Es Pontas, it was mainly alone. I would be out there by myself. And so it was like really like pretty epic times, really taking that inspiration from Miguel. And he would come out there sometimes with me, but for the most part, I was going out there alone, trying that and bringing all of these different experiences and kind of ideas into that and doing it in a new way. And after I started figuring it out, I brought Josh, and they were out in Switzerland they were going to go film with Dave Graham in Switzerland in Valbavona. And so I flew out and met up with them. And that's when we were trying like Off the Wagon and all that.
Great segment, dude. Great one.
And I was like, dude, you guys have to come back with me. I got to show you this. And so we all flew from Switzerland to Mallorca and spent like a week there. And yeah, it was so cool to show them like my new project and how epic it was. And then to see that was kind of like a whole, planting the seed for a whole new film project. But like we were talking about before, it's really cool when you can collaborate with someone like with those guys. It's always been an amazing friendship and collaborative relationship as well, when we can work together to create something like that film King Lions and capture that film, that climb. And it's like definitely, yeah, that was really cool to share that with them. And then of course we came back. We were like, it was like the first bigger film project that Josh had taken on. I think it became like the very first Real Rock, actually. It was the very first Real Rock tour was King Lions. And so that was it was important climb, important film, I think, for all of us,
Yeah. Dude, I love that you shouted out Riding Giants and Jeff Clark. I remember watching that movie and just thinking about just being out in the Pacific Ocean. It's dark, it's heavy, it's cold, and Mavericks is big. And I remember I was talking to Matty Hong, and he was saying how he didn't think people realized what you were doing out there either. Like, I love that you shout Miguel and what he was doing, but I also think that people don't realize how wild deep water soloing feels when there's no one around. I think I first went there in 2009 or 10, and after you guys, but wasn't popular. And going out to Cova del Diablo and being with just my buddy, and we're like, is this okay? Like, is this safe? Like, can we do this? And just that adventure. I love that. I love that you were out there on your own. So cool, man. Just, that's incredible.
Yeah, no doubt. It's good. Like, I think actually beyond bringing bouldering and sport climbing together, it actually encapsulates also adventure climbing, and so it's like bouldering, sport climbing, and trad climbing all wrapped up together. Kind of checks all the boxes.
So Es Pontas was part of King Lions, right? I'm remembering that correctly.
Yeah.
And Chris, I think we were talking about this earlier. It's just, you have sought out these amazing climbs. Like, you saw the postcard of Es Pontas, you wanted to go do it. Biographie is actually pretty incredible as well. And then some of the boulders that you did earlier are iconic and beautiful. And it makes me want to understand what you're attracted to in these lines. Like, why do you seek them out? Like, a lot of people did head towards bouldering in that era. Like, I think when I think of Dave Graham, I think of him as a boulder, and not that he hasn't climbed amazing sport climbs as well, but you seem to have an attraction to specific lines. And I just want to better understand your vision and maybe just ask like, what is a king line, Chris?
So yeah, I think it's like that phrase. I think it actually came from Clem Loscott. We were in India with Josh when we were filming Pilgrimage, and we actually coincided with Clem. He was kind of sick when we were there, but he was talking about that, and the idea of like big, badass, striking lines, and it's like the line of strength. Or when you look at something, you're like you see whatever. You look up at El Capitan, you see the nose, right? It's just like the obvious line that's just like that's like someone's got to climb that thing, right? Or if you look, you see Humildes pa casa, right? That perfect tufa, right? You're like, that's just so striking that I got to touch, I got to climb that. And so, yeah, that's kind of the gist. But I think for me, it's definitely beyond my talent as a climber. My ability to kind of see these lines is something that I'm quite proud of for sure. In my climbing is something that I've always sought out, and you're getting inspired by something in nature, essentially, and then that's something that sometimes with climbing and as big as of a sport as it's become gets forgotten sometimes. Just like that connection, being in nature is such a powerful thing, and getting to interact with nature and these formations that are just so far out and spectacular. But yeah, seeing these lines, and that's like where you're getting inspired by them, and then the motivation and the discipline kind of come naturally from that. And for me, for example, I'm hard pressed to do more than like 15 pull-ups, because you're just like but you're just like, why am I doing this? Like, what's the point of doing this? I'm just not feeling inspired by that. Whereas seeing some incredible line that's just like barely possible, when you see it all chalked up and it's just like the pathway is illuminated, and you're just like, oh man, like I got to do that. Like, that's just so perfect. And so for me, I really like that is the full package of finding. That's actually a boulder problem that we put up in Arkansas, but it's like, that the full package. It's like finding something that's hard at your limit, that's super beautiful, that's in an amazing location or position, that just kind of striking. And basically, yeah, that's what I've spent my career seeking those things out.
What's funny, dude, is you said the line of strength. And when I think about like mountaineering, they're often like, what's the line of weakness? Like where's the like easiest way up? And so I think that's a interesting shift where often what is striking and beautiful and attractive for you, and maybe me because you influenced me, is actually kind of like the line that looks the hardest, that might rebuff me the most. What's the feature that looks the most difficult? Is kind of a cool way to put it, man.
Yeah, yeah. I think Boone Speed. I think he started saying that the line of strength. I like that too. That's good. I've never really thought about that. But yeah, arrettes, prows, anything that stands out in that way. And yeah, like I said, like if something doesn't inspire me, like I'll be really hard pressed probably to even climb 13A, because you're just like, what am I doing here, right? It really comes from that place of being inspired.
That makes sense when I hear that, and the way I see you climb. And when I think of you, Chris, you always typified your try hard, man. I love the try hard. I love the grunting and the yelling. And when I watch you climbing, like watching you on some attempt, or like, he's going to fall there. Oh no, he's going to fall there. Oh, he's definitely coming off on the next move. And somehow you just keep going. Like, I don't know, I guess I'm not even asking a question there. It's just tracing it back to that deep inspiration that there's, just a push forward versus just kind of, I don't know, if you're not psyched, you're not psyched.
Yeah. And it's something I've talked about with Josh over the years, because oftentimes I come across this like, like easygoing, like surfer vibe from California, like it's all chill. And, that is definitely part of my persona. But then like below the surface, there's also like some pretty strong fire, that like I'm like, I need to do something with myself. it's an interesting thing to explore because it's like if you look at any other artists or musicians or anybody that's striving to do something great, it's like there's this inner fire that like they have this angst where they like need to do something to express themselves or to realize what they know they're capable of. That definitely comes out in my climbing when I'm going for it on the wall. And more like technically speaking, I feel like one of the things that I think is a really interesting thing for me that I've been able to do quite well in my climbing is like going from energy saving mode. You're trying to climb using as little effort as possible. And then, you get to that boulder problem spot, that crux move where you have to flip the switch and drop the clutch, right? And like go into some overdrive, right? I think that's something that a lot of people struggle with in climbing. And that's something that I think I've been able to do pretty well is like that. And then also being able to bring it back down, right? Like that's the classic thing. Like maybe we had so many friends that mostly boulder that when they get into rope climbing, they don't know how to, once they get into this like crux mode, they don't know how to like bring it back down, right? And so I think that's really an interesting game, of like being able to use as little effort as possible and then be able to flip the switch and then be able to bring it back down. And I think that's a really cool, interesting part of the process or the game of hard climbing for sure.
I've fallen off some embarrassingly easy moves on sport climbs after doing the crux and people clapping for me, thinking I was done. And then I find it both hard to really go into what I'll call like bouldering mode on a rope. Like, I don't know, there's something about a rope, even though I grew up sport climbing, it's not like I'm not used to it, but it's hard to really let it all out there and feel free when you're 80 feet up and on a rope. And then it also is really hard for me to slow my breathing, get back to, it's like 2 number grades easier, but somehow I'm like, over gripping,
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. Like I think about it as like in bouldering, I have some friends that are so strong and then they struggle so much with it going into rope climbing because they just over grip everything. They have enough power where they can dominate the holds, but they don't know how. So bouldering essentially is like you're holding on as hard as you possibly can. You're dominating the rock. And rope climbing, it's all about holding on as little as possible. And so they're like very distinct approaches, right? And so being able to like shift from one to the other on a route, I think is an interesting side of rock climbing for sure.
Well, this is what I love about deep water soloing is then you add in a whole element of exposure and fear, and you have to be able to, when you're climbing at your limit, you have to climb as if you're not, over the ocean, but then you have to be able to know how to take a fall and get your feet back under you. And it's like this other dose of complexity that is there in bouldering, rope climbing. Like I even threw in trad climbing there. And so I do think that that's one of the reasons it's so special is it tosses in even another variable for that.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's cool. It's so amazing, man. Like, I mean, it's just, I go to Mallorca every year, multiple times a year. Sometimes, I mean, last year I was there a lot trying that route, Vision Quest. But it's like every year I go there and it's kind of like a pilgrimage in a way. It's like going in like a way of like resetting and reconnecting with myself, but like it complements the rest of the year where I'm sport climbing a lot over in the mainland Spain here. And it's quite cool.
It's special, man. So yeah, last time I saw you, you were working on what became Vision Quest, and we were out at this new cliff or cave. I can't remember what it was called because we just called it Sharma Cave. Any way you want to tell the story of how that one came to be or how that cave got discovered? Because I thought that was hilarious and really cool.
Yeah, well, so like along the lines of just saying that for me, one of my main talents, aside from, whatever, having strong fingers, is being able to kind of spot these lines. But we were on a boat, we made this show, The Climb, right, for HBO Max with my good friend Jason Momoa. And the funnest part of that whole show was the very last trip we needed to go shoot the intro for the show. and it was just me and Jason. We brought Josh and Brett out, and we rented a boat, and we were just cruising around Majorca, deep water soloing, and we needed to shoot some footage of us going climbing. And it wasn't like the rest of the show where there was like 80-person crew and all this, complexity. It was just us just chilling, having fun, and we were getting paid for it too, which was like, it was like total
The
like
dream.
pinch me experience. So we were cruising around. We got a yacht because we wanted to explore the far side of the island. And like I saw this cliff line, like I'm always just like checking out the cliff line there. And I saw this like shadows on the wall. But the thing is, we were way out to sea at this point because we were kind of crossing this section. We were trying to just go fast to get around the island. And I saw this distance, but I could tell like, well, that looks like it could be really interesting. Ended up like later on Google Maps, like found the spot where it was, and then went there the next year. And that ended up being this amazing new zone. And yeah, I did the first like main line. I tried it with Maddie Hong, and then I came actually with Ross Fulkerson and climbed the 8C called Honeycomb. And then there's a line to the left that I kind of seemed like might be like the ultimate line on the wall. And then yeah, that ended up turning into Vision Quest. And yeah, that was cool seeing you guys out there. I think we were out there with Mejdi Schalk as well. They were out there the same day as well, right?
And I'm blanking on that younger guy's name. It started with the R. He was just the most Rappa.
Yeah, Darius. Yeah.
So strong. What a great kid.
Yeah. It was that was such a cool day. And it was cool because, those guys, Mejdi just did Es Pontas, and it's really cool to see when people come and repeat your routes. It's very validating, especially like whatever the new generation of like comp climbers, they like see the value and appreciate it. It's like, wow, it's super cool. It means a lot to me. And it was just very, very nice, just kind of like connecting in that way, and that we went to this wall. But
dude, did you see that when Mejdi did Es Pontas, or at least on one of his tries on the dyno, he did like a 1-2. He dynoed and then went to the next hold. Wasn't that wild?
Yeah, I think I was talking with Niels Favre also about it, and he said that some of people are doing it like that now, which is pretty cool. That's a great example of kind of mixing bouldering and sport climbing. And I think seeing those guys put their own spin on it, like taking like the comp boulders and like taking that a step further and like suddenly doing like a paddle move on that route is pretty amazing for sure.
Well, something I wanted to touch on, like, so in the very beginning of our chat, I said something about you still putting up like futuristic FAs. And the reason why I said that is when I watched you on Vision Quest, the sequence and what you were doing, toe hooks. I want to say I even saw a video of you maybe wearing a knee pad on it at some point. Like it was a futuristic or a new school kind of style over the water. It was, did that feel like a new style to you as well?
Yeah, well, for sure. I mean, it's like a complex route. I had to spend a lot of time on a rope figuring it out. Like the sequence was very, very tricky. Yeah, it took me a lot of time figuring it out on a rope. It's not a straightforward sequence. Like the bottom part is it's probably like a V13 boulder. That route is so amazing. I mean, obviously a lot has happened between Es Pontas and Vision Quest, but it's pretty cool finally sending that, because it's like, well, there's like five main routes, so it's like Es Pontas, Alasha, Big Fish, Black Pearl, and Vision Quest, and they're all like 14D, 15A, something or other. They're all in Majorca. Those are like all the hardest routes of deep water soloing. And so it's funny and it's cool that we got a chance to be there together. I think sometimes people might not really understand like what I'm doing over there. And obviously I'm just like repeating the same thing. I'm doing another route in Majorca. It just kind of all blends together, but it's really quite cool, that collection of climbs, but yeah, that climb in particular is super unique, different style for sure. And yeah, it's like a V13 to like a 14A route or something. And not too high, but a nice height for sure. Such a cool location. And yeah, just, like we're discussing as far as after climbing biography, you're like, what is the next step? And it's a lot of what dictates that is like what we end up finding along the way. And so for me, whenever I find these lines, it's like this huge blessing to keep finding that next thing. And obviously it's not really a coincidence because I kind of know where to look and have a pretty good eye for it. But it's still tricky to find those lines that are just barely possible, that are over water, that, when it all comes together like that, you find a climb like that, it's really like a masterpiece. And so, yeah, to see like guys like Jakob Schubert and Mejdi Shak, these guys coming and repeating these routes and appreciating them is like, wow, it's super cool because, and of course, Maddie Hong and Jerne Kruder and all these guys, it's cool because whatever, these are like, well, they're a bit younger than me, but they're also, contemporaries within the world of hard climbing and doing all sorts of different things, whether it's bouldering, sport climbing, comps, and to see them see the appreciation for those climbs. It's just very cool because it's just very validating. Like, oh, like I wasn't just like off my rocker doing some weird thing out in the ocean by myself, like it kind of all comes into focus and just cool, like that interaction, like it really is amazing when you get to share those moments with other people that also get it. There's not that many people that it resonates for them. There's a lot of top climbers that don't have that feeling of that connection with the ocean so much. And, that that's maybe a bit of a turnoff. And so when you see them, their eyes light up in the same way and they're like inspired and you're like, whoa, and like we're speaking the same language, like two insanely good musicians come and play music together, right? It's like being able to have that exchange is really, really cool.
Yeah. I love it there. I'm surprised anyone could think anything other than it's the best after having a great day with your buddies, getting a little excited, a little scared, have a bottle of wine as the sun sets over the Mediterranean. I don't know. I got to tell you, that image of you guys on a yacht cruising around, finding the next great clip. I think if there was something that I wanted to do with my life more than anything else, it would be to cruise around the Mediterranean on a yacht looking for new deep water solo clips. You did it, man, and get paid for it along the way.
I know, thanks, dude. I know I feel a little bit guilty saying it, but that is like the ultimate vision. I mean, like the Mediterranean, like the rock quality in Mallorca, it's so good. Just the overall aesthetic of the place and just the minimalistic kind of like beauty of the Mediterranean, and of course mixed with the quality of the rock, and then it's exquisite. It's like you see all the whatever Instagram people posting on stuff like that, but actually interacting with these places in such a deep way is like, well, and as far as like, yeah, someone who loves rock and the ocean, it doesn't really get any better than that. I mean, the rock is so solid. The holds are like rounded and sculpted, like as if they were made to be climbed, and that's one of the things that enables you to really push yourself, is the rock is so solid there. If it was all chossy, you wouldn't really be able to push yourself nearly as hard. So,
all right, last question about Mallorca and deepwater soloing for you, because I like that you talked about Vision Quest and the style and compared it to some of the other hard climbs in that same grade range, and it's different. It was more compact, more bouldery, and it makes me wonder what you think is the next step in deepwater soloing. I know it's going to be governed by what you guys find, but you think people are going to start going way taller? Is it going to get, even more bouldery and hard? It's like, I see these trends, but it's hard for me to imagine finding something cooler than Big Fish, or even Vision Quest was so cool watching you on that thing, man. That sequence was wild.
Yeah, I don't know, man. I mean, it's, in the same way, like after I climbed Es Pontas, I wasn't sure what my next, if it could get any better than that, and probably can't get better than that in some ways. But finding a route like Alasha re-inspired me, but that took me some years. I think it was probably like 5 or 6 or 7, maybe 8 years that I didn't really deepwater solo very much because I didn't really know what that next thing was, and so I just kind of go where my inspiration or whatever like takes me, right? And so at this particular moment, I do have some other lines in mind in Mallorca. They're beautiful faces and maybe a bit tall. But I don't really know what that next thing is. And that's all right too. Like for me, honestly, it frees me up for rope climbing too. And I've got some really cool rope climbing projects going into the sport climbing season. And so it's all good. There's always more to do in Mallorca. It's like it's just never ending. And so it'll all come together. I don't know what the next, man, more of the same, I guess. I mean, it's really neat to see yeah, Misha and Jakob, they were going out and actually looking for new things, and I'm would be super excited for, I've been kind of leading the charge in that sense of like finding these lines, but would be great to see what other people come up with, and seeking out their own kind of vision for that. And, right now, actually, yesterday I couldn't make the call because I went out to Margalef to try Perfecto Mundo, which is a route of mine that I bolted like 16 years ago, and I'm still trying it. But it's funny because it's actually, I'm trying to repeat it. Was first climbed by Alex Magos, and then Jakob and Stefano climbed it. And so it's really fun to try to repeat a route too, For me, in this case, it's a little bit of both because it's a route that I established. But it would be fun to see more influence from other people. But I think it's hard because it takes time to develop anything, whether it's a first ascent on a rope, sometimes even more so over the water, because it requires a lot of aid climbing. If there's no bolts, like how do you get into the wall on a big overhang? You have to do a lot of shenanigans. On Vision Quest, probably took me 5 days just to figure out how to get up into that wall to like figure out the moves. Not even the moves, but the actual like logistics of like rope, like hooks and cams. And it's very different from just going there and playing over the water. It's like when kind of like what we were talking about, when it goes from being fun and playful to like more of the nitty gritty work to put the time in. It requires a lot of swinging around and feels like you're wasting a lot of time too. But it would be cool to see more development from other people.
I like that. You're just putting that out there to everyone. Go develop something. And I don't know if that's passing the torch as much as just encouraging people to put their own mark on it, so you get to play around on that and not have to always do all the
like
work.
Show me. I don't know what the next step is. Show me, otherwise I'll just keep whatever looks good. I'll keep trying to climb it. But it's cool. Like I feel less and less picky as I get older, in the sense that just grateful to have the opportunity to keep going climbing. That my body feels good, and just having projects that motivate me, that are accessible, that I can attempt in a sustainable way, with family and everything. And so, for me, it's like, as much as I would love to travel more and climb in these different places, I'm pretty grateful that I have this amazing playground, right around my home in Catalonia and Mallorca close by. So there's more than enough rock there. So I'm sure there's lots of more rad stuff to continue to do.
Yeah, what a great place to call home. Okay, I got the question I ask everyone, and that's, how do you go from good to great?
Oh, how do we go from good to great? Yeah, you just have to want it a lot, I guess, and basically really like surrender yourself to that thing, whatever that thing is you are wanting to achieve, right? You basically have to fully commit to that and surrender to that whole process, and give yourself to that. That's hard, not always easy to do, but I think that's really the key for sure. With any of these routes, what I've been working on, there are these moments of doubt, but I have enough experience now to know, like, when a route feels doable, it really does come down to, like, if you just keep trying it, at some point it's going to go, right? And you have to just commit and surrender to that process. And the sooner you can fully kind of surrender, you're like, if I feel like I remember on a lot of different routes, but specifically with Sleeping Lion, I was getting really frustrated on that because I knew I could send it. I just wanted to send it, to be done with it so I could move on and do other things, which is kind of the worst attitude, because like then you actually don't really want to be doing it. You want to be just done with it. And a good friend of mine, Isaac Esteves, he's a speed climber. And, I don't really have much in common with speed climbing. It's not something I've ever done before, but I drew some strength from him in that sense that there's that World Cup speed route or the Olympic speed route, and for a speed climber, they only try one route. And so I was just trying to imagine, like, what if this was just the only route that I ever am going to try for the rest of my life? Would I be okay with that, right? And I tried to kind of imagine that. And once you kind of come to terms with that, you're like, I'm just gonna keep trying this one thing, whether if it takes me another 5 years or 10 years. You get to that level of commitment where you're like completely surrendered to that thing, then that's usually when like the door magically opens. And so it just like it's a process of surrendering your ego and wanting to get it at like a cheaper price or something, right? And it ends up becoming more expensive that way, actually. And so I think you have to fully give yourself to whatever you're trying to achieve. And it's scary because even once you do that, it still might not happen, right? And so you have to be okay with, you have to somehow let go of the end result and just be happy with doing that process. And that's really like the essence of climbing, right? It's like if you're having fun while you climb, then you're going to climb your best too. So,
dude, using that word surrender, super fascinating. I love that you brought up earlier that juxtaposition of you being laid back, chilled, and then also having this deep fire. And somehow when you use that word surrender, it's fascinating, man. It's like this unattached approach, yet when you're there and doing it, you put every iota you have into it. I don't know, man. Really cool. Love that.
Yeah. All right, man. Well, pleasure to chat with you, dude.
Yeah, that was a blast. I hope next time we do it on a yacht in the Mediterranean. But
that sounds great. Let's do it, man.
Just try and manifest that. And yeah, I hope to see you back out there over the water, man.
Thanks, man. Yeah. Thanks for having me, man.
All right. Take care, Chris.
See you, Josh.
Thanks for tuning in. If you'd like even more content, go to patreon.com/Testpiece. And while you're at it, share this podcast with someone you know who would love it. And please leave us a review or rating at wherever you get your podcasts. We've also got tons of great content on YouTube and Instagram, so don't forget to like and subscribe there. Okay, see you next week.